Hello, everyone. I am Minty Bets, and my guest today is the one and only Kyle Anthony, Wager Talk's very own UFC betting expert. Kyle, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's nice to talk some UFC. I know with the many people in Wager Talk, it's, there's a little bit of jealousy factor here because my sport's coming back. So it's it's a little exciting to be the center stage for a while, but it's good. It's good to be back.
Front and center, exactly. So, guys, this show is basically going to be Kyle briefing us on his UFC capping strategies. This is not an episode where Kyle will be giving out his super accurate picks. That's next week, okay? So, everyone, if you're unfamiliar with Anthony, he is, like I said, Wager Talk's UFC betting expert, excuse me. This is the only sport he caps and sells. He's 88% in Wager Talk client plays and has increased his clients' bankroll by 32% just this year. So go check him out on wagertalk.com. You'll see all his past fights that he's sold for clients. Also, him and I do a show together called The Main Event, which we're probably going to be releasing next week, Thursday, or whenever Kyle feels like it.
Somewhere there.
Yeah, right before UFC 249. In that show, it's just me sitting there listening to him give out free plays and his breakdown. So really good show. He's super accurate, like I said. In next week's episode of our show, we'll also be doing a big giveaway for our followers. More details to come next week. So since UFC is the only sporting event on that, we thought that it would be a great way to get some insight on how Kyle caps the sport. So Kyle, I know you're more of an analytical capper doing research. How important is doing your own research prior to making a wager?
I think it's absolutely monumental. When you're talking about, you want to get the right price and you want to get, your money in good and all these other things. But peeling back another layer to just that, I think has to be research. I think you have to really dive into a lot of different things. And the one thing I want to say before even getting into that is that there isn't one way to just do this. There's a lot of different cappers that, and even mid-major Matt, kind of the way we were talking to him, he does it a different way and the way that he likes to break down certain things. And it's the same thing with UFC. It's the same thing with every sport, that you really have to have different ways and that would work for you. And there's even times where I'm fine-tuning some of these things. I'm kind of finding another opportunity to maybe there's something else that I do like, or maybe I want to change something. So I think a lot of that helps you become a better capper. And also it's, when you're saying you want to get a good line or anything like that, that's important. But that's if you're just talking about high level stuff, as in, height, reach, those kind of things. There's a next level to that. That's basically like saying, Drew Brees is 6 foot 185, and that's all you're going to talk about. There's how is the defense running, who's playing, who's hurt, is it home or away? There's a lot more levels to it. So I think taking that aspect of it and that mind frame, I think really helps you even get better value and get your money in good if you're really taking a look at the line and then making sure that the best way to find out if the line is good is by actually going in there, doing research, and finding out where you're going to have that betting edge.
Right. Good point. Thank you for plugging in Drew Brees there. I appreciate that. We have UFC 249 on Saturday, May 9th, taking place in Jacksonville, Florida. And then two more events right after that. One on Wednesday, May 13th. May 13th. Geez. Yes. And another May 16th. Gosh, Kyle, what are your thoughts on UFC pushing out all these events in the span of 1 week?
I think that the first thing is that it's, you can't be, the market's going to be different. For me, the way that I even take a look at UFC as a whole is sometimes we talked about it, I'm looking out sometimes far. I see some certain lines that I like and that kind of thing. And that's when now it's a lot different. You have mass amounts of people that were betting the draft. In normal sense, they wouldn't be, at least to that capacity. And I think the volume here is going to be a lot different. You're going to have a big volume coming in. It's going to change the type of the lines already the lines are moving and we're far out. We're a couple weeks out. That normally, typically with the UFC is not what happens. You're really going to see small volume of betting. And then you're going to see it start to really fight week and everything else. It starts to build up. And that's when you see some more of the line movement. So I've been pretty good with kind of, holding off on a bet, betting early, betting late, kind of seeing where things go. And that's kind of the way I think that you can find some success in that aspect. But with this type of market and having 3 events, it's just going to be, I think the line's going to be changing dramatically overall.
Really? So would you say your capping strategy changes having so many events in 1 week and without like fans?
I think the one thing is you don't want to be overwhelmed. I think that people, when they, you see that there's 3 events, you want to bet so many of them, and we're going to, get into a lot of other stuff, but, you have 3 events, and even for myself, you still want to stick to your process. You still want to stick to what works for you. Don't be overwhelmed with it. Still take a look at your processes. And with 3 events, and again, we're going to get into it, there's just so many betting opportunities. And I don't think that if you're really taking a look at one individually and then moving to the next one, that's the best way to cap. You can maybe bet out a little bit, but I think that, again, stick to your strategy, and then I think that's the way you'll have more success.
Okay, so don't really stray away from your strategy. So when you first look at one single upcoming event, where do you start capping and looking? Like, what exactly do you look for?
Well, I think even the first thing, and maybe taking it back a little bit, would be that there's 45 events. And I've said this many times, 45, 46 roughly events every year. And the one great thing about the UFC is that there is no off season. So, maybe if somebody's really great at a particular sport, if it's hockey or if it's, college football, there's an allotted amount of time in that year that they're going to be able to place those wagers. Of course, there's well-rounded cappers that do multiple sports. But for me, I look at it as such a great opportunity because there's never an off season. And again, if there's 1 week where there's, no UFC, in a normal world, it's different. You're kind of shocked that there's nothing. And it's almost the MMA community doesn't know what to do. So I think the first thing is definitely taking a look at not being scared to pass on an event. And with another one, and again, that happened even this year when I was having, conversations and figuring out which one I'm going to be betting. And, there was one that, on a hot streak doing good. And as much as you want to push out volume, as much as you want to, get more picks out there. And I'm more a believer in it's going to be quality over quantity. And that's where you're going to find more success. So I think with giving up on, particular event, and there was one where I didn't release any plays. I didn't give out any free plays at all. And there was one that I sort of liked, and I just got off the card completely and was able to then focus on a card where I thought there was more value. So when you're looking at a card overall, I think for me, I'm looking at 2 to roughly 5 fights on that particular card that I'm looking at and saying, hey, these are the few that I like, and I'm going to focus in on them, and then we'll get through the strategy. But that's typically for me because I'm not looking at, and a lot of people get excited. It's almost like a football Sunday. You want to bet the 1 o'clocks and the night game, and you want to. I think that don't spread out your basically your bankroll over that. I think that more it's look for the stronger positions, and then you're going to have more success if you're able to do that.
So true. And I don't think that just applies to UFC. I think that applies to all sports. Like you said, like for football, you can't just bet the morning, afternoon, night game all day long. You got to find one that you really, really like and feel confident in so you can be successful. Love it. So when you find a fight you really like, what steps do you then take?
So after and the one thing again is I'm going down the list. So, sometimes there's a fight that sticks out and, there's whether it's a hyped fight, it's a main event, a title fight. Of course, that's going to get a lot of the looks and people are going to be more excited to kind of go to those. But what I do is once I take a look at a fight and I say, hey, the line is interesting to me. Let me take a look at it. Once I do that, then I'm diving into the fight itself. And I think this is a part too where is definitely slept on a lot because everybody, at least in my opinion, and again, I'm sure a lot of people that cap UFC, you know every fight. People know all the fights. They know what happened. They know how the fighter lost, how the fighter won. And I think a lot of times that can play tricks on you. I think because a lot of the times it was a third round late knockout for that fighter. And that's what everybody remembers. They're going to remember that knockout. They're going to remember that, hey, that was the big knockout that happened. And they don't, taking a look at what happened in those first and second rounds is absolutely critical because there's positions where a guy has absolutely been getting beaten up, or at least maybe not on completely one-sided, but beaten up, and then he lands a big shot, gets the win. But really diving into what happened in those rounds. It's not always just the result and saying, oh, the result was this. Oh, that's what happened in this fight. There's a lot more pieces that go into it. And for me, it's going to be looking at if it's a particular fight and I'm looking at it. And there's times where I've spent hours capping a fight, looking at it, going through research. And as I'm going through it, I start to realize that there actually isn't value in this spot, or the line is actually pretty sharp, and I think that it's not worth a bet, I move on. I don't, and I think a big thing too is don't fall in love with the plays, because sometimes you find that big, again, the main event, you're excited about it, and then you're not really seeing an edge either way, and then you still bet it anyway. So for me, when I find a fight, I'm going back to 3 to 4 each for the fighter that I am actually capping. I'm sorry, the fighter that I'm actually betting, and the opponent, and I'm going to be looking through those fights, and again, taking a look at MMA mileage, who's, elevating, who is declining, ages, where they're actually elevating. And a lot of times you see certain things where you're going through a fight and you're starting to say, hey, I see something different. And I'm not, getting into the pick side of things, but I believe, and I think I might have wrote it down, was Calvin Kattar versus Jeremy Stephens. And this is a fight that's coming up this weekend, or not this weekend, but May 9th. And the line right now, you've got Kattar, he's minus 245, and you've got Jeremy Stephens, who is a plus 210 roughly, and that's giving Stephens roughly the implied probability of about 32%. So if you're looking at those kinds of numbers, that's important. Of course, that's important, but you now need to look at what is the next layer to it. And if you look at somebody like Kattar is a fighter who stands from the outside, loves to use his jab and move forward. And he's been very, very good with those kind of techniques. And the reason that he has actually shown some vulnerability is with fighters that move forward. The way that you can actually counter a great jab puncher is by shortening the distance between yourself and the fighter. So somebody like Jeremy Stephens actually doesn't have the greatest, it actually does have a good forward movement. So what he does is he moves forward and shortens that distance. And that's where Kattar, and I'm not saying I'm picking Stephens, but that's where it shows that Kattar actually, this could be a spot where he could be hit. And it's shown multiple times by, Kattar's won fights. But if you look at the styles, it starts to make sense where a little bit at 32%, at plus 210, there's actually some value there. And I haven't finished capping that fight, but that's on top of my head basically saying there's opportunity there. So again, you got to go through all of this. You got to go through the numbers. It's not always, hey, it's minus 130 and now it's minus 150. And that's my decision. Hey, now get off of that. But why? There has to be a reason behind why you're either betting it or you're not. It can't just be the number itself. Yes, that's important, and it has proven profit over time, but you have to have some kind of reason behind it, and going through the fights is going to be the best way.
Right. Research is important is what you're basically saying. Yes. Okay. Awesome. Now, I've always wondered how you determine methods of victory because I don't personally understand. Can you elaborate on how you cap that?
Right. So method of victory is, the props overall for me, when I'm looking on them, when it comes to MMA, I like to cap a fight, 2 fighters fighting, them going at it, working through that. It's hard enough to pick, when the guy's going to lose or what part of the fight is he going to lose? Is it going to be over 2.5, under 2.5, first round? That's very, very hard to do. Of course, that's why it pays so well, but it's hard to do. But I think that the sweet spot when it comes to UFC is going to be the method of victory. So a lot of times, and there was one that I talked about a couple times, was even Valentina Shevchenko. When she had fought a couple weeks ago or a month ago, whatever it's been now, a huge favor, 100, minus 600, something like that. And a lot of people were already pulling away from that fight and saying, line's too big, I don't like it, line's too big. But if you did some research and you looked, that there was only 2 ways that she has basically won over the last 10 years, and was submission and decision. So going into method of victory, taking out just the knockout and doing method of victory by submission only or only by decision, it chopped the line in half. So when you're looking at something like that, just taking that, and now all of a sudden she's a minus, 280. So just by those particular things, you can start to play with the numbers a little bit. I think that it's a great tool to use, even if you have the favorite. Even if you have the underdog, maybe there's a point where you're looking at this guy wins particularly this way, and you want to get a little bit of extra, on top of it. Those are great ways to do it. So method of victory is you have to pick the way that the fighter is going to win. And some books offer it. I'm not sure if, everywhere offers it, but some of them, again, you could do 2 of the 3. Again, you can only win a UFC fight 3 ways. It's decision, knockout, or submission. So with those, you can really start to take a look. And it's not wiki capping. It's not going online and seeing, oh, look, he knocked the guy out. Again, it's looking at what happened in those fights is going to where you're actually going to find more, I guess, more details and nuggets to use when you're actually going to be placing your bet.
Okay, so you're saying there's more betting, there's bigger betting opportunities when betting method of victory rather than just straight up who wins it. Okay, that makes sense. Kyle, do you watch all the fights on the card, or do you just watch the last few leading up to the main event, or just the ones you bet on? Are there any disadvantages to doing this, to watching them all?
I mean, I do watch them all. And again, I know, and I think I talked to Andrew about this as well, that, some people could care less. They don't watch, whether it's the football game, wherever it may be. And I'm not even saying just to cheer it in. It's not, hey, I'm going to cheer this in. And I look at it more as opportunities. So when I'm watching a UFC card, there's going to be roughly 13 fights that are going to be on that card. You have to look at, you're going to watch a bunch of fighters. And not only, and I'm not a type of person that I need to have action on every fight. I enjoy the art of fighting. And that, I think, is enough for me to be involved and just want to pay attention to it. But on the betting side of it, you're going to find some prelim fighters. You're going to find some opportunities where maybe a new fighter who just came into the UFC, you want to take a look at some of these people. You want to take a look at it. And sometimes I'm writing these names down. So there's been points, and we talked about it also about Justin Taffa. He came into a situation where he was coming off of a first round knockout loss. And he was being written off very quickly into that next fight where he was a plus 210. And that was a guy that after he lost that fight, and this was just me watching the fight live, I said, you know what, this guy is going to get great price on his next fight because he's going to take a step down in competition. He's not going to stay at that same competition level because most of the time a guy loses, or a couple, depending where they are, of course, they move down on competition level, and then they're actually more chance, of course, for them to win. But betting wise, people aren't realizing that the competition level has stepped down. So with that was a great spot to bet him, and he ended up cashing and getting the first round knockout. So there's ways that I'm basically capping it almost as I'm going and jotting things down. I think that's very important because I'm looking at this as entertainment. Of course, I want to watch it because I love the sport. And I think that's a critical part, too, when it comes to just capping anything. I think if you're more, emotionally involved in it and not just, hey, I've got a favorite fighter and I hope this fighter wins, more looking at it as I'm going to pay attention to this because there's going to be some nuggets in there that I'm going to be able to jot down, find if the line's good. Sometimes it pans out, sometimes it doesn't. But it's another tool that's going to help you when that fighter comes back up and you do see that he's fighting. You can then take a look and say, you know what? I'm going to do the real research behind this because the last fight felt like it wasn't actually the way that it should have played out.
Interesting. All right. Now, quick last question. What is some advice you can give a new UFC bettors for them to be successful in the long run?
Well, I think a big thing with it is going to have to be it's the bankroll management. I know everybody preaches that, and that's just, a regurgitated thing that's on every one of these shows. But it's very true, of course, that you have to have that. You have to have discipline. But I think that allotting a certain amount of money, the way that I do it is I tier my bets. So I actually end up, kind of going into it. Each event to me is its own bet. So when I'm taking a look at a fight or I'm taking a look at an event and I think that a newer bettor coming in, this is something that they could do is say, hey, I've got whatever amount of money it is for this event, and I'm going to then use certain percentages for it. So the way that I ended up doing it for myself is
how do you tier your bets?
The way that I do it is basically, I'm looking for 2 to 5 plays, on an actual event, and I'm looking at 2 of those. And those are the ones that I release. I'm looking at 80% of my allotted money for that event on those particular fights. And a lot of times people, and again, new people coming in, they're gonna, they want to parlay everything. You want to parlay this, and you've got the and especially in UFC, the one thing about it when you're parlaying, those numbers can really skyrocket when you're doing even a 3 or a 4 fight. I mean, and you throw in a plus 210 in there, and it really starts to. For a new bettor, it becomes very, very intriguing. You start to want to do that. So that, to me, is a thing that you have to really take out of the picture. And the way that I tier it is really, I'm looking at 80% of my allotted amount of money. And again, people do this differently. This is the way I do it. 80% of my allotted amount of money for that event is going to go on the plays that I release. And then about roughly that other 20% or so, I'm going to look at 10% of that is going to go to a parlay. That's how small that I'm looking to then place, because if I have a really great night, and we've had some really great nights, that's where you're really able to, maximize some of those odds. And then the other 10, 15% somewhere in there, I'm looking at, that's where I'm doing some of the free plays that I offer. Those are the ones that I'm going to also trickle in there. So really putting it together that way is that a lot of times people are going to, the 2 fights that somebody loved wins, and then they bet 4 other ones because they just wanted action. You're taking money off of your bankroll. You're really not tiering your bets right. I think that's important because, again, anybody can, picking winners is one thing, but making sure you've got the bankroll management, making sure that you're tiering your bets correctly, making sure you're doing the research behind it, why the line is moving that certain way, and then the path to victory. The path to victory is important. So what is the probability of this thing certain happening? And again, people use that in football, but sometimes they talk it down, or another sport, they talk it down in MMA, but that's absolutely positively true when you're capping a fight. So overall, stay away from the parlays. Is the short answer to that.
Gotcha. Yes, you always stay away from parlays, unless everyone's always going to sprinkle a little bit on a long shot parlay,
But that's again, that's like 5-10%. That's a small amount.
Super small. Yes. Awesome, Kyle. Thank you so much, friends. We're out of time. Be sure to check out Kyle Anthony's picks on wagertalk.com and his UFC betting show on YouTube, Kyle Anthony UFC. And towards the end of the week, like I freaking said, Kyle and I will be doing a UFC podcast called The Main Event, where he gives out a ton of free picks. Kyle, I'm expecting like 5 free picks, okay? So get ready.
Geez. All right.
And we're going to go into detail on our big giveaway. Thank you so much, Kyle, for your time and your tips and advice on betting the UFC.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Stay safe.